Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the first two DLCs for Destiny 2. These are the first one known as Curse of Osiris, and the second one known as Warmind, and these are leading up to the third expansion, which is going to come out later this year, called Forsaken, which is going to be a pretty big gameplay overhaul, much in the same vein as the Taken King was for Destiny 1. But these other two DLCs are much in the same vein as the Dark Below and House of Wolves were for the original Destiny, a lot smaller content packages that were released as part of a season pass, which in this case is available for $20 US or your regional equivalent, with each of the expansions individually being also $20 a pop. So you're basically getting a $10 savings when you get the expansion pass, although in my case I got the expansion pass when it was on sale for even less than that, so that is something worth keeping in mind going further on into this video. And it's also worth noting that the general response from the Destiny 2 community has been pretty negative to these expansions, which isn't really all that surprising given what they encompass. So I'm going to take a look at them in release order. So let's go ahead and get things started with Curse of Osiris. Bungie started off their round of new content for Destiny 2 with the release of Curse of Osiris in December of last year. It features 6 new story missions, all featuring the character of Osiris, the legendary warlock who was thrown into exile, who is actually working against the Vex, and I'll get to more on the story of that in a moment. But the actual contents of the expansion are 6 new story missions, 3 adventures, 2 strikes, a raid, and a bit of new equipment, as well as increasing the power level to 330 and the level cap to 25. The story concerns the return of the legendary warlock Osiris, the guy who trained Ikora, and who was exiled from the city after some pretty hefty disagreements, and his ultimate attempt to take down the Vex threat once and for all, or at least as best as he can hope to do. Because they have this reality engine called the Infinite Forest that is being helmed by an AI known as Panoptes, and it's your job to go in there and assist Osiris in taking that AI down. It ultimately raises far more questions than it actually answers. I mean, for example, Osiris's ghost, who is the only named ghost in the entire series, her name is Sagira, actually ends up possessing your ghost when you try to repair her, and ends up accompanying you for the vast majority of the DLC until your ghost is restored toward the end. And I have to say, she has far more personality than the base ghost. The base ghost has basically no personality whatsoever, and she's actually kind of feisty. It makes me sit there and wonder why they didn't give your ghost some personality like that when you were going through the entire game. Oh well, missed opportunity. Anyway, moving on, another big question is that if the Vex are simulating trillions of realities, and they have a contingency plan for literally every single thing that you could possibly imagine, why aren't they doing something as simple as, oh, I don't know, oh hey, there's a Guardian running around in our network, because when you go into the Infinite Forest, you are basically uploading yourself into the Vex network to do that. Well, why don't they just take this Guardian and take whatever process they're running on and isolate them in an infinite loop with no break condition? The answer is twofold. One, the Vex are nowhere near as smart as they're made out to be, and two, that would just not work as far as the story goes. It would make things very anticlimactic. Anyway, I digress. The story once again fails to take into account that there are thousands of Guardians running around in the world of Destiny 2, because it is in fact a multiplayer game, and instead treats you as the big hero who will ultimately save the universe all by yourself. And when you find out the ultimate plans of the Vex, you just kind of sit there scratching your head going, okay, why? And the game doesn't answer that. It just says, oh, well, they're gonna do this because that's what they want. Why do they want it? Who cares? It's what they want. We gotta stop them. And so, of course, you complete the storyline in maybe 4 hours at most, and it's only 6 missions long, only 3 of which take place in the new area, which is Mercury. The other 3 all take place in locations that already existed in the base game, and regardless of which one you're looking at, the only new enemy type is actually the final boss of the expansion, Panoptes. Other than that, every single thing you will face in this expansion is exactly the same kind of thing you would have fought in the base game, only with some very slightly altered stats here and there to factor in the new level cap and the new power level cap. The only truly new content is the new setting of Mercury, which is an extremely small map, and then the introduction of the Infinite Forest, which is just the same environments repeated over and over and over again in different configurations, depending on which mission you're on. During the course of the campaign, you do get a chance to see what Mercury was like before the Vex took it over, and it just leaves you wanting more of that, because that version of Mercury is far more interesting than the one you're actually running around on. But the game doesn't give you that. It only gives you brief glimpses of it, and then the rest of the campaign is spent fighting in the same ridiculously repetitive, incredibly dull environments. And this leads to a general feeling of been there, done that, because you're just fighting the same enemies you were fighting in the base game anyway, and since you're only going in the same environments over and over and over again, it just becomes extremely repetitive extremely quickly, and the DLC just ends up falling completely flat. You might think that the Vex scheme and the return of Osiris would mean a massive shift in lore, or it would be incredibly important to the ongoing story, but it doesn't seem to be that way, because the way the DLC ends just leaves you going, really? That's it? That's all we get? And it just ends up being a complete disappointment that's frankly not worth bothering with. But that disappointing feeling would only get worse when they released the second expansion in May. This one was known as Warmind, and it contains 3 story missions, 4 adventures, 3 strikes, although you only get 2 if you're not on PS4, and a raid. And that's pretty much it. It also raises the power level cap to 340, and the player level cap to 30, and gives you a selection of new gear as well. So for the same price of Curse of Osiris, you get quite a bit less content overall, and certainly quite a lot less story content, and the story content in this is considerably less involved and interesting. You start off the DLC by responding to a distress signal by fellow Guardian Anna Bray, who has gone to Mars against what Zavala has ordered them all to do, which is not to investigate their pasts, in order to infiltrate the Clovis Bray research facility now that the glaciers on the ice caps are melting and a bunch of warsats are crashing into the planet, revealing the core of the Warmind Rasputin. And the actual progression of the story is extremely simplistic and extremely underwhelming. The actual objective is very simple. All you're there to do is prevent the Hive Swarm from destroying Rasputin's core, and thus silencing the Warmind. This will ultimately lead you into conflict with one of the Hive's worm gods, known as Zol, and you ultimately go on a mission to take down Zol once and for all. And that's really it. There's not very much to this expansion at all, and it's all over in basically 2 hours or less, depending on how quickly you can do things. And frankly, it's actually quite insulting that they have the gall to charge $20 for this on its own, or even $10 as part of the expansion pass. Hell, with what I paid for the expansion pass, I basically paid $7 for it, and that still feels like way too much for what little content you actually get here, and certainly what little meaningful content you get here. Much like with Curse of Osiris, it leaves you with this bewildering feeling that there should have been a lot more content there, just going, was that it? That's all we get? And more importantly, the story just ends up going nowhere. At least with Curse of Osiris, you have some kind of lore implications with the glimpse you get of Mercury before the Vex took it over, and the idea that the Vex were actually working towards some massive plot. With the expansion Warmind, all you really get is, hey, Rasputin's the thing, and there's a worm god that you need to take down, but that's just a worm hunt mission. There's not really anything all that crazy about it. And the only real lasting lore implications you get are what goes on with Anna Bray herself, and with her discoveries regarding Rasputin, and even those are actually very minimal. They try to make the expansion story worth it by throwing in a bit at the very end that is supposed to set up maybe something in the future, but I don't really see that going anywhere because this is Bungie we're talking about here, and they clearly have no idea what they're doing as far as the writing goes. Or maybe they do have an idea of what they're doing as far as writing goes and are deliberately stringing us all along with the promise of actually putting proper story and explaining things in the future and just never actually doing it. I don't know. Regardless, the Warmind expansion is crap. There's really no reason to bother playing through it, and there's not really any reason worth playing through Curse of Osiris either, so the first two DLCs for the game are a complete bust. And as worthless as both of these expansions are, I have to sit here and wonder why anyone would bother with the Forsaken expansion, at least until it gets ridiculously cheap, because I can see where people would be interested in the gameplay alterations that Forsaken has, but everything else is just going to be a disappointment like this is. I could be proven wrong, and I hope I am proven wrong, but the fact of the matter is that Bungie is doing the exact same crap that they did with the original Destiny, only the base game in Destiny 2 is better than the base game in Destiny 1, so it ends up being slightly less of an issue. But just because it's less of an issue doesn't mean it's not an issue at all. And that's something that they really need to keep in mind going forward. Bungie has a lot they need to do in order to endear themselves with their community again, and I really don't see them doing it with Forsaken unless they really get their act together. But hey, it's modern Bungie we're talking about here, so probably not going to happen. We'll ultimately just have to wait and see. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in later videos.